she not only provides help to people who are experiencing homelessness, but she does it in a really amazing and innovative way by encouraging their creativity and helping them to tap into their artistic ability so that they can actually develop as people, but so that we as a community can see them as more than a hungry mouth or something like that. When we see people through the lens of creativity, and we see a little bit more about who they are, and that's what Nicole is trying to do. So I think that it's wonderfully transformative, potentially huge, and we're so proud to be able to bring her to the stage and let her tell some of her stories. So all I really need from you all is a warm welcome for Nicole. She's going to come up here.
Hello, I am Nicole Brandt Minyard, founder and executive director of local social enterprise nonprofit Poverty in the Arts here in Nashville. And I'm going to start with this quote that really lays the foundation of the work that we do. And it says, "If there is no friendship with the poor and no sharing of life with the poor, then there is no authentic commitment to liberation, because love only exists among equals." So growing up, I'm from a really small town in Kentucky, and the narratives told to me about homelessness were pretty stereotypical. They were lazy, drug addicts, and dependent on the government. And when I went and volunteered at my church or school, those opportunities tended to reinforce those stereotypes. Every year, my church would go to a soup kitchen around the holidays, one in Frankfort, Kentucky, and we'd serve them a meal, and then I would try to go and sit down at the table with them. And I would be reprimanded by the staff telling me I needed to get back to the kitchen to work. And it wasn't that I felt like they weren't meeting needs, I just felt like there were more needs that could be met. And it was frustrating because I felt like I was only able to observe them from a safe distance. I saw them at their worst with absolutely no context to their situations or the trauma that they had lived. And that was pretty typical. You'll see these are pretty typical experiences. As you see, I was taking selfies when I volunteered. Here I am at the back of a soup kitchen, and there's when I went to Kenya. I have since tried to delete all of those Facebook selfies from my Facebook of that trip, but some you're just tagged in and they don't go away. So that was kind of where I was starting from growing up. And my senior year of high school, I got connected with a guy who would go to Louisville, Kentucky, and he would go to homeless camps and tents. And it was my first experience really ever doing that. And it really shook up the typical power dynamics that I experienced when I interacted with people on the streets. Because for the first time, I wasn't coming with something. I was a guest in their home and a guest in their space. And one thing that I learned through that experience is that they weren't lazy or morally irresponsible. They were creative and resourceful, but victims of systemic and policy level barriers. And I remember seeing people build incredible structures out of bamboo or the natural resources around them. And I would think, these people are more talented and more skilled than people I know in my hometown who have traditional jobs. How did they end up here? I moved to Nashville in 2010 to attend Belmont University. There's my freshman dorm room, which was fun to find. And I quickly got a work-study job for the Center of Service Learning. And my job was to plan community service projects for Belmont students. So I was really excited, and I knew I wanted to figure out a way to recreate that space that I had experienced in Kentucky. But since I had just moved here, I didn't know where any homeless camps or tents were. I didn't know the outreach workers. I didn't know how to navigate the streets. And so I started to play with this idea, if art could be this space in which we become equals. And we're not there to serve someone a meal, but we're there to write a poem or play music or create a piece of visual art. How would that affect our stereotypes and our interactions? And so in 2011, I found out about an organization called Room in the Inn, which I'm sure many of you know here. And I found out that they have an art studio as well as a music room. And the whole goal of this was, instead of seeing people in survival mode, we'd create an opportunity for them to share their talents and creativity with the Nashville community. And so we hosted our very first Poverty in the Arts event in 2011, and we had visual art, music, and creative writing. And we got such positive response from both our volunteers, who we gave feedback forms and asked, did this change your perspective of homelessness? But also from the participants at Room in the Inn. Because while they still have an art studio, it's usually one person coming in and teaching a room full of homeless people art. But we had provided a setting in which dozens of college students were wanting to know how their morning was, or what their dreams and goals were, or where they had come from and what their story was. It was about getting to know each other, not meeting a physical need, but a deeper spiritual and social need. So we came back and hosted those events at Room in the Inn every year, later incorporating improv theater, which was also an incredible art form to watch how that can change someone's mood and personality. But one of the things, as a junior, I got an internship under the art therapist at Room in the Inn, and I started to see more in depth how talented so many members of our homeless community were. And I would get questions like, how do I get my art in a coffee shop? Or people see me drawing on the street every day, how can I sell it to them without a cop coming up and stopping me? Because you had to have a street vendor's license. And so we filed for 501c3 status with this goal of providing that needed marketplace that seemed to be lacking here in Nashville for our artists on the streets, as well as the mentorship, studio space, and resources to do something with it. And we've done quite well since then. In our 4 years as a nonprofit, we've paid out over $20,000 in artist payments to our artists. We've subsidized thousands of dollars of juried and vendor booth fees for them to sell work. We've facilitated dozens of artistic and business workshops, and we've seen artists transition into housing and maintain employment. However, one thing we realized is it wasn't all about income. Art gave our artists confidence. For the first time in a while, and some of them forever, they were able to reimagine themselves as artists rather than simply as homeless. Whenever they were able to interact with the community, when they're in survival mode, people interact with them as though they were homeless. And for the first time, they were able to reclaim their voice and rewrite those narratives on their own terms. This is Beth, one of our artists. I met her in 2016 through Open Table Nashville, a local homeless organization here. And I was very perplexed when I first met Beth. She was in her mid-30s. She was well-spoken. She had a bachelor's degree from Hampshire College in Massachusetts. I could not figure out why she was homeless. And I started to have conversations with her and to get to know her more. I found out that she had experienced a lot of trauma growing up. I found out that in her 20s, she was trafficked as a sex trafficking victim. I found that after escaping, she was funneled to a domestic violence shelter, which put her on the streets. And that was such a horrible environment, she just wanted out, so she walked to Nashville. It took her 6 months. She stopped at churches, in the basements of places, anywhere she could find, sometimes getting a ride, but mostly walking here. And so I had met her when she had just been in Nashville a couple months, and she had no prior real visual art experience or background. She had done some performing arts, some dance and theater, and really loved creativity, but didn't really have a whole lot of experience with visual art. And one of the things that she told me when she first joined was that she was told her whole life that her mind was a dangerous place, that her thoughts were not right, that she was not safe. And she internalized that messaging and believed it for a really long time. And she said when she joined our organization and for the first time took brush to canvas, it was the first time where she was able to visually see her thoughts come out in a visual way displayed. And she said she realized maybe these aren't so bad. Maybe this isn't so dangerous. And then the community around her, whether it was the artists or our board members or our customers, told her, "You have such a beautiful imagination. You're so creative." And she told me that those were some of the first times she had ever heard that in her entire life. And so we have people who have been so broken and so beat up that they don't even believe they have anything to offer. And so much of what we're trying to do is reinstill that confidence and that they are creative, that they are the ones to imagine a better world for us and themselves because they are the ones dramatically impacted by it. So instead of feeling like our artists are dependent on everyone in the community, we've tried to switch up those power dynamics. And instead, our artists recognize they already have a creative skill that they possess. They can practice and cultivate that skill, leverage it to earn income on their own, and then the community, instead of being someone that has something they need, become their customers or their supporters or their audience or their friends. And so that was really our goal. When we serve or volunteer without context of what created the need for volunteerism, we miss ways to create long-term sustainable change. Through relationship, we begin to realize how complicated simple narratives are, as well as how policy impacts people and creates barriers that we may not necessarily have or recognize. But how do we change policy? without going into law or becoming a politician? How, as we, as artists and creatives, change policy? I think few people understand the role art has in challenging structures of systemic injustice. Art and its mom culture surround us everywhere. They inform the way we connect to each other, the way we identify, and the values we form as societies. I have this really great quote by artist and activist Fabiana Rodriguez. She's from Oakland, California, and creates art around migrant work as well as environmentalism and women's rights. And this quote says, "Art and culture have always shaped policy. Why else would Reagan have gutted the National Endowment for the Arts during his tenure? Why have all of history's most repressive governments gone after the arts aggressively? In order to genuinely tap into the power of art as a catalyst for social change, we must not only consider what of the artistic object, but also how it came to be and who was involved in its creation, as well as whose perspective it reflects. This is how we will recognize, challenge, and ultimately dismantle the white supremacy that still dominates our world and art ecosystem as we know it. Because when we are able to include the stories, the experiences, and the perspectives of people of color, women, immigrants, and queer folks, our world becomes more inclusive, more open, and more loving. We'll hear stories that humanize, that complicate ingrained biases, and that ultimately inspire you to advocate for the humanity of a person that might be different from you. And what I really liked about this quote is it's getting at a couple things. One, art is everywhere. From the visual imagery we see on the streets to in the galleries, to the narratives and stories we see on TV and film, to the books we read our children. But not only is art everywhere, it's informed by the same systematic inequalities that we experience every day. So if the people producing art and are in control of the galleries and of the output of our artistic and creative realms all look like one demographic of people, then those are the type of works that are produced. And so it's so important to center people's on the margins and give them an opportunity to access the arts, to reclaim their narrative. Those who tell the most powerful stories, those who create, share, and maintain control over their truth-filled, emotional, bold content will win. We saw this during the last presidential election when it became clear people are more moved by their emotions than they are by facts. We must center the voices of those at the margin. We need people to be able to access opportunities to reclaim their voice and rewrite their narratives on their own terms. But how can we help humanize those we don't know? How can we center voices of those at the margins if we leave after our volunteer project is over? How can we help others understand how policy affects people's lives if we aren't in community with those affected by it? So I wanted to demystify the path forward to you. Obviously, the end goal is to be in community with people from all sorts of intersecting identities. But when society doesn't carve out clear ways for our lives to intersect, and instead the places we grocery shop, go to school, work, or church are all typically shaped by our socioeconomic backgrounds, we must be intentional. But where do we start? How do we make service and being in community with people different than us a lifestyle and not a one-time holiday tradition? One place to start, by celebrating and supporting art and culture that humanizes, complicates, and connects. One of the really interesting things about my journey is I was a religion and the art major in school, and I didn't really have a lot of context when it came to justice. My sister, however, went to a local liberal arts school in Kentucky and wrote papers on systematic injustice, on policy, really got into the groundwork of it from a formal education. However, I learned through social media, through following people on Instagram, through Twitter, through watching movies and art and seeing other people share their experiences and lived experiences. And one of the most interesting things is that me and my sister both came to the same conclusions. We ended up in the same place, even though she had a more formal approach and I had a more non-traditional approach. So what do? Obviously, we can follow people on social media. We can center voices of marginalized groups. We can buy their art. We can support them financially. We can hire, mentor, and provide opportunities when we see people, and we have a position to do that. As artists, we have an opportunity to impact and change culture. However, as artists with social capital, we have a responsibility to center marginalized voices on our platform, in our work, and most importantly, in the stories that we tell. So we have a studio and gallery space in East Nashville on Dickerson Pike between Cleveland and Douglas. And so whenever we're open, the easiest way, come meet our artists. Interact with our artists. You don't even have to buy a piece of art, although that is incredible because it puts income in their pockets, especially for the holiday season. But most importantly, typically the only places they're allowed to interact with people are where other homeless people are. And when you're in survival mode with other people, that environment constantly perpetuates and drives your behavior in a negative way. So to be able to connect with people who aren't in survival mode tremendously helps them. They're able to build social skills. They're able to learn to negotiate and communicate about their art pieces. So they're building these professional skills as well. So buying art, attending our studio and gallery, we have a website with our open hours. Donating, we're always taking donations, which helps us subsidize some of those professional skills. And then as well as volunteering. We have a variety of volunteer opportunities, from being a studio volunteer to helping us sell stuff at events like we were doing outside, as well as if anyone's interested in joining our board, we're really interested in people with marketing backgrounds, with finance backgrounds, and social work or mental health backgrounds. Thank you so much for letting me speak today. Thanks.